In this video, we'll review tips number 6 through 8. Tip number 6. Create a comfortable environment. You don't want your subjects to feel like this is an interrogation. You want them to want to talk to you. Your interviews should feel like a chat between friends or colleagues with similar interests. Getting to that point will be different for every call. You and your subject might naturally click, or you might not. Expect customers to be naturally suspicious that you are trying to take advantage of them. So calm their suspicion. It's up to you to build a rapport. Tip number 7. Your interviews should not feel like an interview at all. It should be a conversation. Here are a couple of tricks to help you build that rapport. Start with some small talk. If you pick up that your subject is wary from the start, get them talking on light subjects, like the weather or sports, to open them up. It also helps if you read questions starting with the broader topics and then narrowing them down. For example, when I was conducting customer interviews to learn how teams manage content creation and distribution, right after introduction section, I would start asking questions that follow content creation process. First, how do you create your strategy? How you decide on topics to write about? How you go about producing and reviewing your content, and so on. And then I would ask about content publishing, distribution, and tracking. For example, when I was conducting customer interviews to learn how teams manage content creation distribution process, right after introduction section, I would ask questions that follow content creation process. First, how you create your strategy, how you decide on topics to write about, how you go about producing and reviewing your content, and so on. Then I would ask about content production, distribution, and tracking. There is a clear pattern here that roughly follows a content creation and distribution processes. It will help your subject understand that there is a sequence rather than a target of rapid-fire questioning. Tip number 8. You are in control of the conversation. It's up to you to direct it. I had an interview with a customer who would say, "I'm not comfortable sharing that information," or "I can't talk about that for privacy reasons," every time I asked a question. I quickly realized that I wasn't going to get any answers out of this person. Instead of continuing, I asked him and said, "I want to be respectful of your time, but it seems like there is not a lot of information you can share at this point." We cut off early and everyone was happy because even though it wasn't a fit, I still handled it politely. It isn't much fun to get on a call and not being able to get the information you hoped for. But don't stress out about it too much. That's why you have more interviews scheduled. Another common issue you'll run into is keeping your conversation on track. Once I spent the first 10 minutes of an interview listening to a prospect complain about politics of their organization. It was my job to steer conversation back on track. I would say, "Yeah, I can see why that would be frustrating, but by the way, how did you go about trying to solve the problem?" If customers keep talking about irrelevant topics, you have to learn how to politely shift the conversation to where you need it to go. My next tip is number 9, is about embracing the silence. This was a tough lesson for me to learn, but think about it. Your questions are going to require your subject to stop and reflect, and that means silence. You'll be tempted to fill the silence by giving them suggestions. If you do that, you'll end up telling them what you want to hear or what they think. So embrace silence and let your customers think a little about how to answer your questions. There is nothing wrong with the silence on these calls. Then, when you do start getting answers, don't be afraid to drill into the specifics of their responses. Imagine that a customer told you that they had a successful article. Okay, so what made it successful? What metrics did they track? Was it successful because it drove a lot of traffic? Was it because it landed 10 demos? Or that because 10 industry experts emailed them to say it was an excellent article? Ask for specifics because you need to understand the context. You don't want to go back to your notes after and find that you still have questions about why customers gave you the answer they did. Okay, that wraps up tips 6 through 9. Let's move on to the tips 10 to 15, where we dive more deeply into the specifics of the interview process.